Karen's voice was a banshee wail, slicing through the tranquility of my ranch like a rusty blade. "You'll regret this, you hick," she screeched, her pink tracksuit practically glowing with her fury as she jabbed a manicured finger at me. I leaned against the fence, the late afternoon sun warming my back, and tried not to laugh. This wasn't the first time Karen from the HOA had stormed onto my property, demanding access to inspect my land for some imaginary violation, but it was the first time she'd called 911 over it. I'm Jake Tanner, a man who's spent the last decade carving out a quiet life on this 50-acre slice of Montana heaven. My ranch, Tanner's Rest, is my sanctuary. Rolling hills, a creek that sings at night, and a barn full of horses that don't care about HOA bylaws. My wife, Laura, is the polar opposite of me, sharp, city-bred, and the youngest police chief in the county's history. She's the kind of woman who can silence a room with a glance, and I love her for it. But Karen didn't know that. Karen didn't know a lot of things. The trouble started 3 months ago when the HOA, led by Karen, "I'd like to speak to your manager, Mitchell," decided my ranch was an eyesore because I refused to paint my barn red to match the community aesthetic. Never mind that my property isn't even part of their jurisdiction. My land predates their gated McMansion enclave by a century. Karen, with her clipboard and her self-righteous smirk, had been hounding me ever since, citing made-up rules about fence heights, grass length, and even the unacceptable number of wildflowers in my pasture. Wildflowers. I ignored her letters, her emails, and her increasingly unhinged voicemails. But today, she'd shown up in person, her SUV blocking my driveway, demanding I let her onto my land to document violations. "No, Karen," I'd said, crossing my arms. "This is private property. You're not coming in." Her face had turned the color of her tracksuit. "This is a community matter," she'd shouted, as if my ranch was her personal fiefdom. "I have rights. I'm calling the police." I shrugged. "Go ahead." That was 20 minutes ago. Now, she was pacing my driveway, phone pressed to her ear, spitting venom to the 911 operator. "Yes, he's threatening me. He's blocking my legal right to inspect this property. I demand an officer right now." I could hear the operator's calm voice trying to de-escalate, but Karen wasn't having it. She shot me a triumphant look, as if she'd already won. I didn't bother explaining that my wife was the one who'd be getting that call. Laura had been at the station all day, probably buried in paperwork, but I knew she'd get a kick out of this. Sure enough, not 5 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up, its lights flashing lazily in the fading sunlight. Karen's smirk widened as she hung up the phone, folding her arms like she was about to watch me get cuffed. The car door opened, and Laura stepped out. She was a vision in her crisp uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, her badge catching the last rays of the sun. Karen's jaw dropped so fast I thought it might hit the gravel. "Chief Tanner," I said, tipping my hat with a grin. "Fancy seeing you here." Laura's eyes twinkled with amusement, but her voice was all business. "What's the situation, Jake?" Karen spluttered, her confidence evaporating. "Wait, you're his wife. This is a conflict of interest. I demand another officer." Laura raised an eyebrow, her gaze pinning Karen like a butterfly to a board. "Ma'am, you called 911 to report a threat. I'm here to assess the situation. Care to explain why you're trespassing on private property?" "Trespassing?" Karen's voice hit a new octave. "I'm with the HOA. I have authority to." "No, you don't," Laura cut in, her tone sharp as a whip. "This land isn't under HOA jurisdiction. You have no legal right to be here, and you certainly don't have the right to demand entry. Now, I suggest you explain why you thought a 911 call was appropriate for a civil dispute. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I couldn't help it. I chuckled. That was a mistake. Her eyes snapped to me, blazing with renewed fury. You think this is funny? I'll have your ranch condemned. I'll sue you into oblivion. You'll wish you'd never crossed me. Ma'am, Laura said, stepping closer, her voice low and dangerous. Threatening my husband on his own property isn't a good look. I suggest you leave before I cite you for harassment. Karen froze, her bravado crumbling under Laura's stare. For a moment, I thought she might actually apologize. But then her eyes narrowed, and she jabbed a finger at Laura. This isn't over, she hissed. You'll both regret this. She stormed back to her SUV, slammed the door, and peeled out, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the air like her lingering spite. Laura turned to me, one eyebrow arched. You okay? Never better, I said, pulling her into a quick hug. You should have seen her face when you stepped out of the car. She laughed, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. She's not going to let this go, Jake. People like her never do. She was right. Karen didn't let it go. What started as a petty HOA dispute spiraled into something far uglier, a vendetta that would test our marriage, our home, and the quiet life we'd built together. The next morning, I woke to find my mailbox stuffed with a cease and desist letter from Karen's lawyer, claiming I was in violation of some obscure county ordinance. It was nonsense, of course. Laura confirmed it with a single phone call, but it was only the beginning. Over the next week, Karen escalated. She posted on the HOA's private Facebook group, spinning a tale of me as a dangerous recluse who'd threatened her life. She filed complaints with every county office she could think of, from zoning to animal control, claiming my horses were a public nuisance. She even called a local news station, pitching a story about rural lawlessness on my ranch. I tried to laugh it off. Laura didn't. She's trying to ruin us, she said one night, her voice tight as she pored over yet another baseless complaint. This isn't about the ranch anymore. It's personal. I reached for her hand, squeezing it. We've handled worse. She's just noise. But Karen wasn't just noise. She was a storm, and she was gathering strength. 2 weeks after the 911 call, I found one of my fences cut, and 3 of my horses were missing. I spent a sleepless night searching the hills, my heart pounding with fear for them. Laura called in every officer she could spare, and we found the horses by dawn, spooked but unharmed, tangled in a thicket 2 miles away. There was no proof Karen was behind it, but I knew. Her smug smile when I saw her at the county fair the next day told me everything. She's dangerous, Laura said that night, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. She's not going to stop until she gets what she wants. And what's that? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She wants to break us, Laura said. She wants to win. I pulled her close, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a dark cloud. We'd built this life together, fought for it through years of struggle, me parents' bankruptcy, Laura's grueling climb through a male-dominated police force, the endless repairs to keep this old ranch standing. We weren't perfect, but we were a team. And now, Karen was trying to tear it all apart over a petty grudge. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal battles and sleepless nights. Karen's complaints grew more creative, each one a new jab at our sanity. She claimed my creek was contaminating the neighborhood's water supply. It wasn't. She reported me for illegal construction, because I'd built a new shed, fully permitted. She even tried to get my dog, Rusty, seized for excessive barking, despite the fact that he's a 12-year-old mutt who barely lifts his head anymore. Each accusation was a pebble in a landslide, small but relentless, designed to wear us down. Laura fought back with the precision of a general. She countersued for harassment, dug up every regulation Karen had violated in her crusade, and even got the HOA board to censure her for misusing their authority. But Karen was slippery. She had money, connections, and an uncanny ability to twist the truth. The neighborhood rallied behind her, dazzled by her tales of standing up to the dangerous rancher. I started getting dirty looks at the feed store. Laura's officers reported whispers of discontent at the station, people questioning whether she was too close to my case. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Laura broke the silence. "I'm scared, Jake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not of her, but of what this is doing to us. I don't want to lose what we have." I took her hand, my heart aching. "You won't," I promised. "We're tougher than she is." But even as I said it, I felt the first cracks forming. Karen wasn't just fighting Mesh, was fighting our life, our love, our home. And she was winning. It was a month later when the real blow came. I was in the barn, mucking stalls, when Laura burst in, her face pale. "Jake," she said, her voice shaking. "They're trying to take the ranch." I froze, the pitchfork slipping from my hands. "What?" She held up a letter, her hands trembling. "Eminent domain. The county's claiming they need your land for a new highway. It's her, Jake. Karen's behind it. She's got a cousin on the county board, and they've been pushing this through in secret." I felt the world tilt. Tanner's Rest wasn't just land, it was my family's legacy, my father's dream, the place where Laura and I had sworn to grow old together. And now, because of one woman's vendetta, it was slipping through our fingers. "We'll fight it," I said, my voice hoarse. "We'll sue. We're trying," Laura said, tears in her eyes. "But she's got money, Jake. She's got influence. And we're running out of time." That night, we sat at the kitchen table, legal documents spread out like a battlefield. Laura's hands were steady as she marked pages, but her eyes were red from crying. I wanted to fix it, to protect her, to protect us. But for the first time in our marriage, I didn't know how. Karen had turned our sanctuary into a war zone, and the worst was yet to come. The days after Laura's bombshell about the eminent domain claim felt like walking through a fog. My ranch, Tanner's Rest, had always been my anchor, the one constant in a world that never stopped shifting. Now, it was under siege, not by bulldozers or developers, but by a single woman's relentless spite. Karen Mitchell had turned her petty HOA vendetta into a full-scale assault, and I was struggling to keep up. Laura threw herself into the fight with the ferocity I'd always loved about her. She spent every spare moment at the station or on the phone with lawyers, digging into the county's sudden push for a highway that no one had mentioned until now. "It's a sham," she told me one night, her voice tight with exhaustion. "The county doesn't need a highway through your land. This is Karen pulling strings with her cousin, Councilman Hargrove. He's got a reputation for bending rules for family." I nodded, my jaw clenched. "What's our move?" "We expose it," she said, her eyes blazing. "We prove this is a personal vendetta, not a public need. But we need evidence, Jake. Hard evidence." Evidence wasn't easy to come by. Karen was careful, her tracks covered by layers of bureaucracy and plausible deniability. Her cousin, Hargrove, was a slick politician who knew how to play the game. Every public meeting about the highway was framed as a community benefit, with vague promises of jobs and better traffic flow. The fact that the proposed route cut straight through my ranch was presented as an unfortunate necessity, not a targeted attack. Karen, meanwhile, played the concerned citizen, attending every meeting with her clipboard and a sanctimonious smile, rallying neighbors to support the project. I wasn't about to let her win. I started attending the meetings too, standing in the back of the county hall with my arms crossed, staring down Hargrove as he droned on about progress. The first time Karen saw me there, her smile faltered for a split second before she recovered, tossing her head and whispering something to the woman next to her. I didn't care. I wasn't there to make friends, I was there to fight for my home. Laura and I split the work. She handled the legal side, filing injunctions and digging through county records for any hint of impropriety. I took to the community, talking to neighbors, farmers, anyone who might know something about Karen or Hargrove. Most people were sympathetic but scared. Karen's HOA had a stranglehold on the neighborhood, and Hargrove's influence reached deep. Still, I got whispers. A clerk at the county office mentioned offhand that Hargrove had pushed the highway plan through without the usual environmental studies. A rancher down the road said he'd seen Karen's SUV parked at Hargrove's house late at night. Small pieces, but they were starting to form a picture. One evening, I got a call from Old Man Carter, a grizzled rancher who'd known my dad. "Jake," he rasped, his voice thick with years of chewing tobacco, "you didn't hear this from me, but Karen's been cozying up to a developer from Bozeman. Word is, they're eyeing your land for some fancy resort once the county seizes it." A resort. The thought made my blood boil. My family had poured their lives into this land, and Karen wanted to turn it into a playground for rich tourists. "You got a name for this developer?" I asked. "Some outfit called Pinnacle Properties. That's all I know." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Laura was still at the station, so I grabbed my laptop and started searching. Pinnacle Properties was a high-end development firm with a history of snapping up distressed properties for cheap. Their website boasted about transforming underutilized land into luxury destinations. I felt sick. This wasn't just about Karen's ego, Anna Maria, it was about money. When Laura got home, I showed her what I'd found. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the website. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "If we can tie Karen or Hargrove to Pinnacle, we can prove this highway is a front." We spent the next week chasing that lead. Laura used her contacts at the station to pull financial records, while I leaned on every connection I had in the county. It wasn't easy. Karen's HOA minions were everywhere, spreading lies about me and Laura, calling her a corrupt cop, me a land-hoarding menace. The local paper ran an op-ed, suspiciously well-written, accusing us of obstructing progress. I knew Karen's fingerprints were all over it. Then we caught a break. Laura's deputy, Mike, a lanky kid with a knack for computers, found an email chain buried in Hargrove's public records. It was heavily redacted, but one line stood out, a mention of Pinnacle in a discussion about land acquisition. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get a judge to issue a subpoena for more records. Laura was ecstatic, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She was barely sleeping, her face drawn and pale, her usual fire dimmed by stress. "Laura," I said one night, catching her staring blankly at a stack of documents, "you need to rest." "I can't," she snapped, then softened. "I'm sorry, Jake. I can't let her win." Not after everything we've been through. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her tremble against me. We're in this together, I said. She's not taking our home. But Karen was relentless. The next blow came when animal control showed up at the ranch, claiming they'd received a tip about neglected horses. It was another of Karen's lies, but it meant hours of inspections, paperwork, and stress. My horses were fine, healthy, well-fed, and loved, but the accusation stung. Karen knew how much they meant to me, how they'd carried me through the darkest days after my dad's death. She was hitting where it hurt. The community was fracturing. Some neighbors, tired of Karen's drama, started quietly supporting us, slipping me notes or stopping by to offer help. Others, swayed by her lies or just scared of her influence, turned cold. I stopped going to the feed store after the owner, a guy I'd known for years, refused to meet my eyes. Laura faced her own battles at the station, where a few officers questioned her impartiality. She brushed it off, but I saw the hurt in her eyes. One night, as we sat on the porch, the weight of it all crashed over me. "Laura," I said, my voice rough, "are we losing this?" She didn't answer right away. The crickets sang in the distance, and the stars glittered above the hills. Finally, she took my hand. "We're not losing," she said, her voice steady. "But it's going to get worse before it gets better." She was right. The next morning, I found my barn spray-painted with the word "sell" in bright red letters. Laura called it vandalism and promised to investigate, but we both knew who was behind it. Karen was escalating, and she wasn't subtle anymore. I spent the day scrubbing the paint off, my anger simmering with every stroke. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that word "sell" burned into my mind, a taunt from a woman who wanted to break me. A week later, the county held a public hearing on the eminent domain claim. Laura and I prepared like it was a war. We had documents, witness statements, and a lawyer who'd taken our case pro bono after hearing our story. The hearing room was packed, neighbors, reporters, even a few curious ranchers from out of town. Karen sat in the front row, her pink tracksuit swapped for a prim blazer, her face a mask of fake concern. Hargrove was at the podium, spinning his tale of public need with the ease of a seasoned liar. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "This isn't about a highway," I said, looking straight at Hargrove. "This is about one woman's vendetta. My family's worked this land for generations. It's not just dirt, it's our home, our life. You're trying to steal it for a developer who's already counting their profits." The room buzzed. Karen's face twisted, but she stayed silent. Hargrove tried to interrupt, but I kept going, laying out every piece of evidence we'd gathered: the emails, the developer connection, the rushed process. When I finished, a few people clapped. Others whispered. Karen's eyes burned into me, but I didn't look away. Laura spoke next, her voice calm but commanding. She presented the legal arguments, dismantling the county's case with precision. "This is an abuse of power," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "And we will fight it to the end." The hearing stretched late into the night. By the time it ended, we were exhausted but hopeful. The judge promised a ruling within a week. Laura and I drove home in silence, her hand resting on mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, I woke to sirens. 3 patrol cars were in my driveway, lights flashing. Laura was already outside, her face pale as she argued with an officer I didn't recognize. "What's going on?" I demanded, storming out. The officer, a nervous young guy, wouldn't meet my eyes. "We got a report of illegal activity on your property," he said. "Drug trafficking." I laughed, incredulous. "You're kidding." Laura's voice was ice. "Who made the report?" The officer hesitated. "Anonymous tip." "It was Karen." "It had to be." Laura sent the officers away, promising to handle it, but the damage was done. Rumors spread like wildfire. By noon, the local news was running a story about alleged criminal activity at Tanner's Rest. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors, some concerned, others accusing. Laura's position at the station was shakier than ever. That night, we sat in the kitchen, the weight of it all pressing down. "She's destroying us," Laura whispered, her voice breaking. "Everything we've built." I took her hands, my heart aching. "She's not winning," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "We're still here. We're still fighting." But the fight was taking its toll. Laura was pulling double shifts, battling both Karen and the growing distrust at the station. I was barely keeping the ranch running, my days consumed by legal meetings and damage control. Rusty, my old dog, seemed to sense the tension, curling up closer to me at night. Even the horses were restless, as if they could feel the storm coming. The ruling came a week later. The judge denied the eminent domain claim, citing insufficient evidence of public need. Laura and I hugged, tears in our eyes, thinking we'd won. But the victory was hollow. Karen's lies had poisoned the community. The news stories, the rumors, the vandalism feed left scars. Neighbors we'd once called friends now avoided us. Laura's job was on the line, with whispers of a no-confidence vote at the station. And Karen? She didn't stop. She filed an appeal, claiming new evidence of environmental violations on my land. It was another lie, but it meant more legal bills, more stress. I started to wonder if we'd ever be free of her. One night, as Laura slept fitfully beside me, I stepped onto the porch and looked out at the ranch. The hills were dark under the stars, the creek a faint murmur. This was my home, my heart. But for the first time, I wondered if it was worth it. If we were fighting a losing battle. Karen had turned our lives into a nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. The victory in court should have been a turning point, but it only seemed to fuel Karen's obsession. The judge's ruling had slapped down her highway scheme, but she wasn't the type to slink away in defeat. Instead, she doubled down, her vendetta growing darker, more vicious. Tanner's Rest, once my sanctuary, felt like a fortress under siege, and Laura and I were running out of strength to hold the walls. Karen's appeal came fast, a new stack of accusations about environmental violations on my ranch. She claimed my creek was polluting the groundwater, that my horses were damaging protected wetlands, that my entire operation was a hazard to the community. It was all lies, backed by flimsy reports from a shady consultant she'd hired. Laura tore the claims apart in hours, proving the creek was pristine and the wetlands were just a muddy patch from last spring's rain. But the appeal kept us trapped in legal limbo, draining our savings on lawyer fees and expert testimonies. The community was fracturing further. Karen's HOA propaganda machine worked overtime, painting us as villains. She organized neighborhood safety meetings, where she'd stand at a podium, her voice quivering with fake tears, warning about the dangerous elements on my ranch. Some neighbors, swayed by her charisma or just tired of the drama, nodded along. Others, the ones who'd known my family for decades, reached out quietly, offering support. One, Mrs. Delaney, a retired schoolteacher, slipped me a note at the grocery store, "Don't let her win, Jake. She's done this before." That note stuck with me. I started digging into Karen's past, something we should have done months ago. With Laura's help, I accessed public records and reached out to old contacts in neighboring counties. What I found was chilling. Karen had a history of bullying property owners, always targeting those who didn't fit her vision of a perfect community. 10 years ago, she'd driven a small farmer out of business in Idaho with similar tactics: endless complaints, lawsuits, and anonymous tips to authorities. The farmer, a widower named Tom Haskell, had lost his land and his health, dying of a heart attack a year later. Karen had moved on, unscathed, to our town. "She's a predator," Laura said when I showed her the records. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "She doesn't just want your land, Jake. She wants to destroy you." I nodded, my stomach twisting. "Then we take her down first." We threw everything we had into exposing her. Laura worked her contacts at the station, pulling strings to get Karen's financials under scrutiny. I reached out to Tom Haskell's daughter, Ellie, who lived in Boise. Over a crackling phone call, she told me how Karen had hounded her father, filing false reports until he couldn't afford to fight anymore. "She's a monster," Ellie said, her voice thick with grief. "If you're fighting her, don't stop. She'll ruin you if you do." Ellie's words lit a fire in me. I wasn't just fighting for my ranch anymore, I was fighting for everyone Karen had hurt, everyone she would hurt if we didn't stop her. Laura and I built a case, piece by painstaking piece. We found a paper trail linking Karen's consultant to Pinnacle Properties, the developer eyeing my land. We uncovered emails between Karen and Hargrove, carefully worded but damning, hinting at kickbacks if the highway deal went through. Laura's deputy, Mike, hacked together a timeline of Karen's complaints, showing how they escalated after I refused her access to my ranch. It was a pattern of harassment, clear as day. But Karen was always one step ahead. When we presented our evidence to the county board, Hargrove dismissed it as hearsay, and pushed for a new hearing on the environmental claims. The local paper, now firmly in Karen's pocket, ran a hit piece calling Laura a biased chief protecting her husband's interests. The station was buzzing with tension, and Laura came home one night with news that broke my heart: the mayor had called for a review of her conduct. "They're trying to force me out," she said, her voice hollow. "If I lose my job, Jake, we can't afford the legal fight." I pulled her close, feeling her tremble against me. "They're not taking your job," I said, my voice fierce. "And they're not taking our home." But the pressure was crushing us. The ranch was suffering, fences kept getting cut, equipment vandalized, and I found a dead raccoon on my porch one morning, its throat slit. Laura filed a report, but there was no proof it was Karen. The stress was eating us alive. Laura barely ate, her face gaunt from sleepless nights. I was no better, snapping at her over small things, my temper frayed. Even Rusty, my old dog, seemed to feel it, limping more than usual, his eyes dull. One night, I found Laura crying in the barn, her face buried in her hands. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I'm failing you, Jake. I'm failing us." I knelt beside her, my heart breaking. "You're not failing," I said. "You're the strongest person I know. We're doing this together." She looked at me, her eyes red. What if together isn't enough? It was the first time I'd ever heard her doubt us, and it shook me to my core. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, wondering if we'd already lost. The ranch, our marriage, our future, it all felt like it was slipping away. The final hearing was set for a cold November morning. Laura and I prepared like it was our last stand. We had new evidence, a whistleblower from Pinnacle Properties, a junior exec who'd overheard Karen and Hargrove discussing incentives for seizing my land. The exec, a nervous woman named Sarah, agreed to testify anonymously, fearing retaliation. Laura also secured a statement from Ellie Haskell, detailing Karen's past. It wasn't airtight, but it was enough to make the board listen. The hearing room was packed, the air thick with tension. Karen sat in her usual spot, her face a mask of calm confidence. Hargrove was at the podium, his smile slick as ever. Laura presented our case, her voice steady despite the bags under her eyes. She laid out the evidence, piece by piece, her words cutting through the room like a blade. Sarah's testimony, read anonymously, was a bombshell, linking Karen to Pinnacle's plans. Ellie's statement brought gasps from the crowd, exposing Karen's history of destruction. When it was Karen's turn, she stood, her voice dripping with sincerity. "I'm just a concerned citizen," she said, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "This ranch is a danger to our community. I'm fighting for all of us." I wanted to scream, but I stayed silent, my hands clenched. The board deliberated for hours, the longest of my life. Laura and I sat outside, holding hands, barely speaking. When the ruling came, it was a gut punch. The appeal was denied, but the board recommended a compromise to avoid further conflict. They suggested I sell a portion of my land to the county for future development, at a price far below its value. It wasn't a win, it was a loss dressed up as fairness. Karen's smile as she left the room told me she'd gotten what she wanted, a crack in our armor, a way to keep the fight going. Laura's face was stone, but I saw the defeat in her eyes. That night, we sat on the porch, the silence heavy between us. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Laura didn't answer right away. Finally, she said, "We could sell." I stared at her, stunned. "Sell? This is our home." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But it's killing us, Jake. The legal bills, the vandalism, the remorse, it's too much. I can't lose you to this fight." I wanted to argue, to tell her we could keep going, but the words wouldn't come. She was right. The ranch was my heart, but Laura was my soul. If fighting for one meant losing the other, what was the point? The next morning, I called a realtor. The decision felt like cutting off a limb. We listed Tanner's Rest for sale, not to Pinnacle, but to a conservation group that promised to preserve it. The price was a fraction of what it was worth, but it was enough to pay off our debts and start over. Laura resigned as police chief, unable to bear the whispers and the politics. We packed up the house, said goodbye to Rusty's favorite sunny spot, and loaded the horses onto a trailer. Karen didn't attend the closing, but I saw her SUV parked across the street, her silhouette watching as we signed the papers. She'd won, not by taking the land for her developer friends, but by breaking us. The ranch was safe from her resort plans, but it wasn't ours anymore. We'd fought with everything we had, and it wasn't enough. We moved to a small house in a neighboring county, a place with no HOA, no Karen. Laura took a job as a private investigator, her fire slowly returning. I started a small horse training business, trying to rebuild. But the loss of Tanner's Rest hung over us like a shadow. We didn't talk about it, but I saw it in Laura's eyes every time she looked at the hills, in the way she'd pause when she heard a creak. One night, months later, I got a call from Mrs. Delaney. "Karen's gone," she said, her voice gleeful. Moved to California. Tried her tricks on a new neighborhood, but they sued her into bankruptcy. I thanked her, hung up, and told Laura. She nodded, her face unreadable. Good, she said, but there was no joy in it. Karen was gone, but the damage was done. We'd lost our home, our community, our peace. The ranch was safe, but it wasn't ours. And that was the bitterest pill of all. We rebuilt, piece by piece, but the scars remained. Tanner's Rest was a memory, a wound that never fully healed. Karen had taken more than our land, she'd taken a piece of us. And as I looked at Laura, her hand in mine, I knew we'd survive, but we'd never be whole again.